Let's be honest here. You have biases. I have biases. Every single coach walking into a session carries a set of mental shortcuts that shape how they see their clients, often without realizing it. The question isn't whether these exist. The question is whether you're willing to look at them. And I get it. That's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to think of themselves as biased. But here's what I've learned after training hundreds of coaches. The ones who do the best work with clients aren't the ones who've eliminated their bias. They're the ones who've learned to see them. So here's the thing. When I say you're biased, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying you're a human person. Our brains are wired to create shortcuts. We take in millions of pieces of information every day, and there's no way to process all of it consciously. So our brains categorize, filter, and make quick judgments. That's not a flaw. That's survival. But those same shortcuts that help us navigate daily life, they can interfere with our coaching if we're not aware of them. This isn't about feeling guilty or becoming paralyzed by self-doubt. It's about developing the awareness to notice when those shortcuts might be leading you somewhere your client doesn't need to go. Now, if you've been coaching for a while, you might be thinking this isn't new. Good coaches have always done this inner work. And you're right. But here's what changed. In the 2025 update to the ICF Core Competencies, the word biases was explicitly added to marker 2.04. Previously, this marker focused on context and culture. Now it reads, remains aware of and open to the influence of biases, context, and culture on self and others. ICF is no longer just implying this matters. They're naming it directly. For those of you pursuing your ACC or PCC credentials, this means bias awareness isn't a nice to have anymore. It's an essential part of embodying a coaching mindset. So let's get practical. What kinds of biases actually show up in coaching? I want to walk through 5 that I see most often, the ones that trip up even experienced coaches. And as we go through these, I want you to do something uncomfortable. Don't think about other coaches who might have these biases. Think about yourself. Notice where you feel a little twinge of recognition. That twinge, that's information. Let's start with confirmation bias. This is when we see what we expect to see. You form an impression of a client early on. Maybe you think they're not really committed to change. And then you start noticing all the evidence that supports that belief. They reschedule a session, see, not committed. They didn't complete their action item, told you so. Meanwhile, you might be missing all the ways they are showing up, the vulnerable share they made, the small shift in their thinking. Here's a question to ask yourself. Did you really know your client wasn't committed? Or did you just notice the evidence that confirmed what you already believed? Now, affinity bias works differently. This is when we favor people who remind us of ourselves. A client who shares your background, your communication style, your values, they might get more patience from you, more benefit of the doubt. But here's the twist. Sometimes affinity bias works the other way. Sometimes we're actually harder on people who are like us. We expect them to handle things the way we would. And when they don't, we get frustrated. Then there's anchoring bias, getting stuck on first impressions. I once worked with a coach who discovered she had been coaching a young client for months without fully updating her initial assessment. In their first session, she'd assumed this 26-year-old couldn't possibly be leading a company. Turns out she was the CEO of her own startup. The coach's anchor, young means inexperienced, kept her from seeing what was right in front of her for weeks. That first piece of information you learn about someone, it can color everything that follows if you're not careful. Attribution bias is about how you explain behavior. When a client doesn't follow through, what story do you tell yourself? If your internal narrative is they're lazy or they're not taking this seriously, that's attribution bias at work. What if instead you got curious? What obstacles might they be facing that you can't see? The way you explain behavior determines how you show up as a coach, and your client can feel the difference. Now, here's the hardest one: unconscious or implicit bias. These are the biases operating completely below your awareness. You don't know what you don't know. Think of it like an iceberg. The biases you can name and notice. That's the part above the water. But most of your bias patterns are beneath the surface, shaping your reactions before you even know they're happening. A coach I trained once noticed she consistently interrupted female clients more than male ones. She'd been coaching for years without seeing it. It took a colleague reviewing her recordings to point it out. That's why this work requires more than good intentions. It requires ongoing practice, feedback, and a willingness to be shown what you cannot see on your own. So what do you do when you catch yourself in bias or when someone else points it out? I want to give you 4 strategies that actually work. First, pause. When you notice a strong assumption forming or a strong reaction in yourself, just stop. Create space before you respond. That pause is where awareness lives. Second, question your assumption. Get curious instead of certain. Ask yourself, what else could be true here? What am I not seeing? Third, actively seek out perspectives that challenge your initial read. Look for evidence that contradicts what you think you know. And fourth, bring patterns to supervision or mentor coaching. When you notice yourself having similar reactions with multiple clients, that's a signal. Don't try to work it out alone. Get another set of eyes on it. Here's something I want you to really hear. This work doesn't have a finish line. You don't get to complete a bias training and check the box. This is lifelong practice, not a destination you arrive at. Now, the good news, it gets easier. Recognition becomes more natural. You start catching yourself sooner, but it never finishes. As you grow, as your clientele expands, as the world changes, new biases emerge. Context shift. This isn't something to feel defeated about. It's actually part of who you're becoming as a coach. The commitment to keep looking, keep learning, keep getting feedback, that is the work. And it makes you better at this. Let me name some mistakes I see coaches make around this. The first is claiming equal treatment. I treat everyone the same. Here's the thing. That statement usually means I don't see my biases. But bias is unconscious by definition. You don't notice it operating. Having good intentions doesn't guarantee equitable impact. The second mistake is treating this as a one-time event. You watch a video, you attend a workshop, you think you're done. But one training doesn't rewire neural pathways that have been building for decades. This requires consistent, ongoing practice. And the third mistake, getting defensive when someone names your bias. I know that's hard. Nobody wants to hear they were biased. But here's another way to look at it. When someone points out a blind spot, they're offering you a gift. The chance to see what you couldn't see alone. Defensiveness shuts down learning. Curiosity opens it up. So let's bring this together. You have biases. The work isn't proving you don't have them. It's learning to see them. When you catch yourself in bias, you have tools. Pause. Question your assumptions. Seek other perspectives. Get support from supervision or mentor coaching. And remember, this work never ends. That's not a failure. That's the nature of being human and growing as a professional. We've been looking at how bias lives in each of us and how to interrupt it. But coaching also happens across lines of difference we sometimes can't fully understand. Culture, identity, background, lived experience. In our next video, we'll explore what it means to coach effectively across those divides and why sometimes not knowing is the most powerful place to be.